The 7th Global Alcohol Policy Conference is underway in Cape Town. The theme of the conference is investing in people before profits, building momentum towards the framework convention on alcohol control. The gathering aims to emphasize the need to be proactive and take proactive steps at both national and especially global levels to address alcohol harm. For more on the story, we now speak to the Southern African Alcohol Policy Alliance Chairperson, Bongiwe Ndondo, who is now joining us virtually. Bongiwe, good morning. Thank you so much for making time for us. We're now coming out of proceedings there of the Tavern, and at the core of that court case is a failure to adhere to the license conditions that have been issued to the Tavern owners. First of all, what do you make of the lack of enforcement when it comes to alcohol-related regulations in the country?
Good morning, and thank you for starting at that point, because that's exactly where I wanted to go. I think at the very least, the Tavern owner should be hanging his head in shame, for having allowed, something so tragic to happen. I mean, we lost 21 lives at Eyobeni, and he is defending. He is trying to lay the blame elsewhere, and yet in actual fact, there was a non-compliance to his license conditions, and that license should have been revoked a long time ago. But beyond that, this is a case of culpable homicide. Young people died in that tavern. So even just beyond the license issues, we should be looking at his culpability in the death of young lives, in the demise of young lives. But I also want to point out to something else, because you spoke about government. I think, government needs to step up its own act around regulation of alcohol. A lot of communities are telling us that tavern licensing, especially in relation to license to trading hours, are not adhered to. And it's very difficult for communities to reach out to the police to come and enforce this license conditions. So our communities are besieged. They are living in fearful conditions because of taverners who don't adhere to their licensing, and the fact that they cannot go and report them to police stations.
Yeah, and honestly, every time we have a conversation about the use of alcohol in the country and the abuse of alcohol, always comes in the conversation around a livelihood, especially when it is with the taverns, and these taverns, of course, being found mostly in townships as well as rural areas. How do we approach this in a balanced way that says that on one end, there's also the right to making a living, but on the other end as well, there's also the regulations that are in place, but dealing with a situation where we are facing a binge drinking problem of this country?
Every business sector has got regulations. So before we even start talking about the choice of livelihood, let's talk about whatever conditions are attached to your license, you need to be compliant. That's the starting point. The second point is, when we talk about livelihoods and alcohol in particular, there are a lot of bylaws that are not being enforced. Because at every turn in our townships, you find a liquor outlet, whether it's a tavern or shebeen or whatever you want to call them, at every single turn. And yet there are regulations, bylaws that say we should not have alcohol, the density of liquor outlets should not exceed this many, per square kilometer or per household. There's regulations about how, around where to locate a liquor outlet. It must not be located within proximity to a school, within proximity to a hospital, within proximity to a community center, and so on and so forth. And all of these regulations are not being enforced. So again, there's a problem. There's a disconnect between policy at national level and implementation of and bylaws at a local level, and the translation of what the national norms and standards are down to local level implementation by the municipalities.
Yeah, yesterday the keynote address being delivered by the Minister of Social Development, Lindiwe Zulu, Do you think that she struck all of the right notes that are required by activists like yourself? She says, for instance, that I hear you and that message is clear. Pass the Liquor Amendment Bill now.
That's what the minister said. We can only go by what she said. You know, our experience with government has not been a very positive one, because often they will listen, but the wheels take long to move. We've had the Liquor Amendment Bill sitting in Parliament since 2016, and we have been asking what is stalling it. So we have our own suspicions about what is stalling it, but government is not coming out and being clear. There's also a lot of disharmony within government policy. So if you speak to DSD, for instance, Minister Lindiwe Zulu was here, and she said one thing, but if you engage DTIC, you might get a different story. So we are also calling for the convening of the interministerial committee, where these issues are going to be dealt with by all the ministries that are involved, all the departments that are involved, because right now, there's different messages being sent from different departments within the same government, unfortunately.
Yeah. And the same government also, if you look, for instance, at the Bella Act, which is before Parliament, is, you remember early on in the year, the Basic Education Portfolio Committee saying that they have been receiving some complaints and people saying that there must be a reconsideration to Clause 8 of the Basic Education Laws Bill that allows for private functions on school premises to actually have possession and consumption of alcohol.
Well, that was again because those clauses have since been removed from that bill. But what is noteworthy is that parents, South Africans are saying we don't want alcohol in our schools, and that was the strongest message ever. Now, we need to move those gains from beyond just junior school or lower level schooling, and talk about what is happening within our institutions of higher learning. When Tavern happened, the president suggested that we would be looking at whether we shouldn't be moving the minimum legal age of drinking from 18 to 21. Yeah. Now, imagine what our institutions of higher learning would look like if we made it illegal for young people between the ages of 18 and 21 to be allowed to drink. It would completely transform those spaces. So again, we are looking for concrete policy options from our legislators and for government to enforce those policies. And provide the necessary support to our regulation processes and mechanisms.
Is changing the age limit really the answer, considering that what we have in the country is we have an 18 years age limit, we have regulations that are in place and some of the bylaws that you were referring to a bit earlier on as well, but there's no enforcement. So even if you move it up to 21 years, what enforcement will there be?
You're right, but we need to start somewhere. So in 1984 in the US, most of the states in the US moved the minimum legal drinking age from 18 to 21. And through that policy option alone, no other intervention, they were able to bring down per capita drinking rates quite significantly. So yes, you are right that the enforcement has got to be, enforcement has got to be improved. But we need to enforce good laws. So let's work on the laws and then work on their enforcement. It's not one or the other. We've got to be pulling both.
And just in closing remarks, what do you expect the outcomes of this conference?
I think it's been a great conference so far. I think it's a gathering between academics, researchers, policymakers, and there's a lot of, cross-learning. It is an international conference. We've got a lot of countries from the global north, but also others from the global south with different contexts to South Africa. So we are sharing and learning from each other, which I think is very important. But quite importantly, I think moving out of this, we are hoping to have some concrete issues around, best practice in the regulation of alcohol, but also how we deal with some of the technical issues around tax, the tax system, and also advertising and marketing of alcohol products. Issues, new issues have emerged, such as digital marketing, such as how we regulate digital marketing. So the issue we're talking about, the minimum drinking age, even though it's 18, when somebody is buying alcohol online, how do you know? How do you verify that they are 18 or 21 or whatever is the case? So those are some of the issues that we're hoping to explore and get some best practice around.